Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Ben and Turk attended the ICM Conference at Iowa State University this week. Hear the summary of a few sessions they attended, including Dicamba studies combined with weather patterns by Kevin Bradley and crop market updates from Chad Hart. Joe attended Ehler Bros Farmer Meeting over by Champaign, Illinois, revealing their test plot data.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars. We have Turk and Ben. They just got back from Iowa State University. Tell us about it, Ben.
Yep, so this week we had the ICM Conference, which is their Integrated Crop Management Conference. It's good to go back. We hadn't been back last year. They did an all-online version, and there's just something that you miss when you're watching online classes rather than going up there and taking notes and getting to talk to the professors that are doing the studies. So it was a good update. One of the discussions and one of the presentations was given by Dr. Kevin Bradley. He is the Missouri State weed scientist, weed expert, and he has published and accumulated a lot of data on Dicamba to dispel some of the myths, and I just kind of wanted to walk through, 6, 7, 8 of the highlights that Kevin had talked about that are pretty important in what potentially could be a part of an EPA decision here, because these are published records. Everything that I talk about you can go through and look up, and most of it is published by Kevin himself or one of his other colleagues from Southern University. So first thing on the list here is vegetative growth. So basically, if you have a Dicamba off-target movement happen that affects a soybean plant, even if it happens during vegetative growth, there is a yield penalty associated with it. The earlier in the vegetative growth, the less penalty is associated, but more than likely what happens is you will see multiple applications hit that soybean field, because it's very rare that you're going to get one application only if you have multiple neighbors in the area that are spraying Dicamba products, just because of the relative ability of the Dicamba to volatilize, whether it's new product or not. So vegetative growth, definitely you can see yield penalty associated, especially if you see more than one hit. R1 to R3 applications or off-target movements, R1 to R3 off-target movements definitely hurt worse. And he had a litany of multiple applications at 1/10,000th of a rate, like a V3, an R1, and an R5. It just kept stair-stepping down. The later the off-target movement happened, and the more times it happened, the more damage that was done to the soybeans. So that's something that we've known. It's something that we've talked about on this show probably 100 times. He also talked about how important it is to be looking at the time of year that the application happened, because if you have an off-target movement happen to a V3 soybean in double crop, it most definitely will affect the yield, because that plant has a very short amount of time to recover. So when you're looking at June planted soybeans versus late March and early April down there, clear down south on the boot hill, even the June planted soybeans that are affected early, you will see yield penalty associated. So two things there that come with the timing of off-target movement. It is definitely it is very apparent that temperature plays a huge role. That's why certain states in the past couple of years have put temperature restrictions on the product. That line is somewhere between 80 and 85 degrees. You see an exponential growth on the level of volatility when you're in the mid-90s. So that's pretty important on if there is a Dicamba label. Applying it when temperatures are below 80 degrees really helps that product stay home. Dicamba emissions based off the surface that they are applied. So this is another study that they had, something that we talked probably about 2 years ago, but it resurfaced. And it is when you're applying Dicamba to soybean stubble, we have very little move off. When you're having Dicamba applied to bare ground, there's a little bit more that moves off, but when you have Dicamba applied to green material, which is when the majority of the post applications are happening, there's something like a 40 to 50% increased volatilization rate, and that has everything to do with the reflectiveness and the absorptiveness of that soybean plant. With that, building onto that, there is a study that hasn't been published yet, but it's in the works, that when you apply to soybeans that are still have a little bit of dew left on them, that dew actually has a lower vapor sensitivity. So the vapor index is the word I'm looking for, that if the soybeans have dew on them, there's like a 30 or 40% higher volatilization rate off of those. So you want to make sure that you're applying early enough in the morning that it's cool enough, but not too early in the morning that you have dews associated with that product. Soil pH levels, they did 4-inch soil pH levels and surface soil pH levels. So when you are looking at pH changes in the soil, the top 1/4 inch of soil is completely different than the bottom 4 inches, or when you're looking at a normal soil core, the top is actually a fair bit amount more acidic because it is exposed to sunlight, it is exposed to wind movements, is exposed to herbicide applications. So fertilizers, yep, exactly. So everything in that top pH is what the dicamba is being applied to if you're using it on pre-emergence, and the more acidic that pH is, the more volatile that product is. Anything that you put in the tank that makes the product more acidic or has a lower pH, the product becomes more volatile when you put it in those levels. They also learned that inversions, even though all meteorologists are aware of what they are, and a lot of weed scientists have now become aware of what they are, inversions, specifically in the state of Missouri, happen way more than anybody ever even acknowledged. In fact, during the typical summer spray period, 2/3 of the days have inversions at the end of the afternoon. So, and if we have a 24-hour gas off period, 24 to 96-hour gas off period, more likely than not, you're going to be caught in an inversion in one instance or another. Now, see, that changes. We get more mixing as we move to the north. So there's a good chunk of southern Missouri that falls under those 2/3 of the application dates. As you move north and west, you get into where you see in Iowa, where you see all the wind turbines and stuff. We actually have higher levels of wind movement, and there is a lot less inversions that happen. So that could be a deciding factor on why we see more movement. So that's something that I hadn't really thought about before, but there's a map of where the windiest counties are, but for the definite problem areas that Kevin was looking at, inversions happen a lot more often than what they thought they would. One of the other topics that I've never really heard about was cool air drainage, and that's where you have a body of water, and it kind of goes along with the temperature inversion, where you have a mass of warm air trapped between two cooler levels. It follows the same premise, where warm air will actually dive into cooler air. So you have a mass, if you have a river, if you have lakes or substantial streams, that air will actually move and dive towards those bodies of water, which we've seen off-target movement in the southern areas of our footprint, mainly because the majority of their productive acre is river bottom ground, and we see a lot higher percentage of those acres being affected. The cool air drainage would be a pretty decent explanation on why that would be. It's just really interesting about all the research that's been done about this, and a lot of the stuff we halfway heard about, but it's just a good reminder on, these are all of the things that could be looked at as challenges to make that program work. And you think back about all of the advantages that come with the system that we currently are pushing. You don't have to worry about a lot of these because we were working with a near zero volatility product like the Colex D formulation of 2,4-D, and you get the option to spray Roundup in that tank mix or Liberty in that tank mix, which are both acidifying factors, and you get phenomenal weed kill when you have those extra products in to be able to attack the harder to kill weeds. So it's a complicated issue. I feel like we are the most educated about the issue because we're the ones that are out looking at the fields constantly and making some of the same observations that Kevin has here. The one thing that I didn't write down that just popped into my head was also the rainfall. If there's a direct correlation between the percent adoption of dicamba traded products and the amount of dicamba that is found in rainwater, and the higher percentage of acres that you have that are being sprayed with dicamba, the higher levels that are found, which is pretty, I mean, if you think through that, it's a pretty common sense point to come to, but those areas, it basically dispelled any fact that atmospheric loading is a real thing. So, you know, when you're looking at, well, that's a term that's never been coined before, or that's something that they're just making up, there's definitely data coming out of Norsworthy and Dr. Jason Norsworthy out of Arkansas and Kevin Bradley studies that he's done from around the state that talk about this stuff moves with rainwater. It actually flushes the atmosphere out. That's one more challenge that platform has to fight with.
So we're still expecting an EPA announcement of some type of restriction on dicamba, it sounds like. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, that's...
From what we hear, you know, the rumor mill's a big wide thing. You know, I have heard from people that it will be a week from when this episode is recorded. Whether or not that's going to happen or not, it hasn't happened in the past month when we thought it was going to happen anyway. So, just all things to be thinking about. And
the bottom line is, it's like we've always said, it's like the wild teenager. You don't know where it's going or what it's going to do.
Yep. The biggest thing is that everything that Kevin talked about is based on science, based on research, multiple years of research,
yep,
as opposed to everything else that seems to be going on out there and on limited data by companies. EPA hasn't done a very good job of performing their own research to figure it out, but thanks to the University weed scientists, we do have science-based information, and if EPA based their decision on a science-based discussion, then there's a high probability that there's going to be significant changes to the label.
And it sounds like temperature is a big thing, and basically what the crops around it, what stage they're in.
Yep.
So a pre-emerge is probably the only real option they have.
That data that he presented, the research that he presented on the amount of vapor that comes off of green leaf tissue, especially if it's wet, is just phenomenal, the difference. And so a pre-emergence only can still be a very viable option, and it makes sense.
Yep. So we'll obviously that was just one presentation. Just for the sake of time, we'll move on. But I'll share some. They have some cropping year-end review stuff that I found really interesting. We have some fungicide information that I found really interesting. So we'll share that on future Cup of Joe episodes. But that's what I have for this week.
Well, that's great, Ben. Turk, what do you have for us?
Well, listen to Chad Hart at this meeting as well, and he presented some information on the markets and the reasons why we can expect to continue to have fairly strong markets, at least for the next year. And in the information that he presented, it also talked about how fertilizer may not be as high priced as we think it is, given the market prices that we have, and so it is fairly sustainable, the prices of fertilizer, along as we stay with the prices of corn and soybeans that we have. The risk is, again, as we've talked about more than once, is the fight for acres. And there's a possibility that some of these other specialty crops in some of these fringe areas that raise corn and soybeans may move some other crops that are also very high priced. And so it's going to be very interesting in the next month or two or three to figure out who's going to win that battle. But right now, the markets have went up, came back down, and are moving up. So it seems like we're in a trading range here right now, and I don't look for that to change.
Yeah, at some point they're going to have to tell the farmers what they want planted, based on the price. So Will they want the corn acres, bean acres, whatever it may be? But everything's pretty strong right now. So that'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, his nickname is Dr. Doom for a reason, because he was talking about all the potential things that could go wrong. And one of the things I found really interesting about Chad's discussion was how much corn China has bought. And that's one of the reasons that our corn price is hanging as high as it is. So be watching those export markets, because that's really going to indicate where our prices land too.
Well, you guys went west, I went east, and I was at Ehler Bros annual farmer meeting and data report, and there's a lot of things I could talk about that too, but I think the most important thing that they said was, before you make your seed selection, make sure you've got your herbicides figured out, particularly when it came to glufosinate, Liberty. That seems to be the one that's the tightest and the most effective herbicide out there, and there's going to be demand from both platforms for that Liberty. Seems like that's still playing out, and a lot of the retailers, some of them have answers, some of them don't. So advice is, make sure you have your plan for what traits you're going to use, and make sure you simultaneously you line up the herbicide, so you're not have a trait platform you can't get a herbicide that you desperately have to kill weeds. So no changes there from what we've talked about.
Right.
Well, we'll go to a couple of our jokes that hopefully will get you through till next week. And I think these ones here are maybe a little bit above average. We'll see. Okay. Well, of course.
Does anybody get credit for these jokes
No.
this week?
Well, my son Jeff has a calendar, and he shares them with me. And like I said, for years, my son and my dad would read the jokes each day. So now I'm sharing it with you.
There we go.
Okay. This one here is titled "Laughing at the Law." Okay, laughing at the law, and everybody loves a good lawyer joke. Okay. Two lawyers were walking along negotiating a case. "Look," said one, "let's be honest with one another." "Okay, you first," replied the other. That was the end of the discussion. Now I got a couple bird jokes, okay? They're short. What bird always sticks to you? What bird always sticks to you? Velcro. Okay. Did you hear the one about the crow and the telephone pole? He wanted to make a long distance call. Okay, let's stop here before we. Anyhow, we kind of ruined a really good show today, but anyhow, we'll go forward from there. As always, we hope you and your family are healthy and safe. We appreciate your business, and we'll see you next week.